Hi, thanks for joining me again. Today, for this video, I'm going to talk about one of my favorite topics, which is lifelong global leadership development. I'm hoping that it will be helpful to you not only through the time in the course, but more importantly, far beyond that throughout your entire leadership career. I want to start with a list here. It's a rather long list, but a list of ways to change yourself, things that are required in order to be able to effectively make personal changes in yourself. It comes from Warren Bennis's workbook called Learning to Lead. And as you look down the list here, I won't read each one of them for you, but the requirements around data gathering and self-reflection and openness and so forth are enormous. So the intention here is to think about this as an ongoing process. And let me highlight just a couple of these. Reflecting, making self-observations. I don't know at this point whether you keep journals or not, but I would urge you to do that, even if you don't do it on a daily basis, if you use it as an opportunity to reflect from time to time. Meditation is another way to do that. Certainly conversations, if you have good friends who are interested and willing to discuss self-observations with you, not to be so much a coach for them, but just to give you the setting where you can talk about them yourself as well, and things can come to mind or come to light even as you have discussions about self-observations. Certainly understanding the history and the context and so forth that you come from. I've talked in some of the other videos about taking risk and the need to accept failure, and those two pieces relate directly as well to Warren's work, Bennis's work in regard to crucibles, creating personal vision and so forth. One way to kind of bring these together, to think about them from a simpler perspective, is to go back to the model that I described, the model I use in terms of thinking about organization change. It relates just as well thinking about change as at an individual level. So clarifying the present, thinking about what the desired future state is for yourself regarding individual issues, and how you're going to get from where you are now to where you want to head. You might remember from that video that I stressed the fact that organizations tend to pay too little attention to the current state and really focus the energy and activity and action on the desired future state. Well, as individuals, we do the same. So we tend to be focused on all the great things that are going to happen when we achieve whatever it is we're heading out to do, and less attention on what could be corrected, what could be honed up, what could be improved now. So as you think about your personal leadership development over time, keep thinking about keeping an eye on the present, keeping an eye on what's going on right now and what the situation is for you as an individual. So we're going to start with the idea, and this, by the way, I should have said this in the very opening of this video. It would be a great idea as you do this if you would keep a file open and just make some notes for your own benefit, because this is an action-oriented video. I'm going to make some suggestions for a play-along version of this where you can actually begin to dig in on some of these issues as I talk about them. So clarifying the present is the first piece of this, again, with a focus on where you are now as compared to where you're going to go. And we are going to look at the issue of where you want to head, but right now we're going to look at clarifying the present. What I'd suggest for that, as one means of beginning to get a sense of that beyond just your day-to-day activities, is thinking about what values you hold. What's important to you, what guides you, what speaks to you, what gives you satisfaction, meaning, purpose. And I'd ask you to come up with a list of 5 to 7. That seems to be a workable size there that we can keep in mind, but gives enough variance that we're not just thinking about one particular aspect of what's important to us. At the bottom of this slide, and it's very small print, but at the bottom of this slide is a list of values that's pulled from Friedman's book, Total Leadership, which, by the way, is a is a great resource for doing this kind of thing. But you may have values that come to light for you that are important to you that are not listed here, and by all means, go for that. The list here just gets you started in terms of thinking about values. So 5 to 7, and again, you might want to stop this and kind of do it as we go along, or maybe do it at another time. And for each of those, a driving question that I'd ask you to think about and write about, better not just to think about it, but also to write about it, is why is this particular value important to you? What is it about this that matters to you, to get a bit more to the specifics? Now we begin already to focus on the distant future. So we're thinking about where you are now and where you're going to be heading, and we're beginning to set the path by setting this data point. And there are lots of different ways to think about the desired future state for our personal development. One of my favorites is that top question, which is what's one spectacular, and it's underlined for a reason, contribution or achievement that you want to make in your lifetime? What is that? And again, this bears thinking beyond the speed that I'm offering this information up to you. It's something you might contemplate for a fair amount of time. But what is that one spectacular contribution or achievement? Another way to think about distant future is what would you do if? So if you didn't, if you weren't constrained by the constraints that you put on yourself at this point in time, what would you do? Okay, if it's something you're aiming for and you feel that you don't have the resources to do it, what would you do if you did have those resources? In other words, just really using blue sky thinking to think as positively as possible about what you would do. Third bullet point there, another way to think about the distant future. What actions or purposes do your values inspire? So going back to what I asked you in the first part of this about what your values are, given those values, particularly given the composite of those values, what sorts of actions would they inspire? What sorts of purposes are you drawn to naturally because of the values that you hold? And then the fourth point I particularly love, and that is from a lifelong perspective, who is it that you want to affect? Whose lives do you want to impact? Whose day-to-day do you want to impact? And why is that the case? And in particular, how do you want to impact those people? I think it's a very interesting way to think about the purpose that can drive you in your distant future. So let's sharpen the focus a little bit. Thinking about ultimately and lifelong and so forth is quite a way out there. Let's think about it in terms of 5 years. And 5 years goes by pretty quickly. If you think back 5 years, think about today's date and think back 5 years, it may seem like those 5 years pass by pretty quickly. For all of us, 5 years, we have 260 weeks, 1,825 days, or 2 1/3 million minutes. So that's what stands between us and the date 5 years out. And I love this quote. I'm going to interject it before I even take you to the action step on this. It's by Mary Catherine Bateson. If you think you know what you'll be doing in 5 years, you're wrong. But if you don't have an opinion on it, you're in trouble. And here's the heart of the whole quote. Go toward the future with a plan that you're willing to let go of. I just love that because the spin of the world, the kinds of trends that I talked about in an earlier video, 5 years out, it's very unlikely that what you're going to project today will actually hold in those 5 years. So it's not just here you are today, here you head in 5 years. It's not just that the trajectory is going to change, but the goal will move over time, will change over time, most likely for all of us. So, with a 5-year frame, think about today's date, add 5 years to it, write the date down, and the question is, what could you do or what will you do? And if you need a little inspiration for that, in 5 years, Columbus discovered the Bahamas, Cuba, North America, and South America. Michelangelo painted the Sistine Chapel, and Shakespeare wrote Hamlet, Othello, Macbeth, King Lear, and 5 additional plays. So 5 years, again, the time can pass very quickly, but if you are moving meaningfully to the goal, it's amazing how much movement you can make, how much advance you can make in 5 years. So focus forward on the 5-year horizon. So from the previous slides, what I'd suggest is just think about what that goal is and maybe make some notes. At this point, I want to ask you to be more specific about it. So write your own scenario. And again, I'd put today's date, add 5 years to it, write that at the top of your scenario. What will you be doing in 5 years? What impact will you have had in 5 years? In other words, how will your reach across work, home, community, or self, all of those or any of those. And by the way, that model of those 4 interlocking circles comes from Friedman from the Total Leadership book as well. In the best case, again, what impact will you have had? And then we're back again to the issue of effects on others with that final bullet point. Excuse me. How will you be improving lives? Not just your own life, but others' lives in 5 years. And whether you do it now or whether you do it sometime into the near future, hopefully within the next couple of days so it doesn't float out of your immediate attention, I'd urge you to do a little bit of free writing about that, to think about that in a meaningful way. What's that 5-year horizon? Picture it. Sometimes when I use this as an assignment in the course, the students will turn it in to me, and they talk about how their day starts. I mean, I think in the best cases, it's very vivid. And it may not be vivid to you as you start it, but the writing itself may also help to direct you toward what really matters for you now and into the future. Friedman talks about using experiments and trying to come up with things along the way. So as you're starting today, looking out beyond the horizon at that 5-year desired future self, thinking about experiments, things you might try out differently, behaving in ways that are different than you have, or focusing slightly differently than you have or than you do at this point. So you're looking for ways to experiment and make some movement toward that 5-year goal. Things that are actions that are meaningful to you, that are real, that are important, that you have the ability to achieve, that are specific, that are challenging, that have the stretch to them, with that rubber band analogy I talked about in a previous video. Benefits that move you toward the type of life that you want and the type of world that you want to live in. And that's something, as you're writing about these and thinking about these, you might want to put that at the very top, the type of life you want and the type of world you want to live in. And certainly, not only as leaders, but in particular as global leaders, you have the opportunity, the rich, enormous opportunity to actually affect the world that you want to live in as part of what you do, as part of your job responsibilities. Moving a little further on this is to bring it into the reality, to begin to think about what those experiments will be. So what do you want to work on right now? And a good way to do that is to choose 2 or 3 of the changes that you're aiming for and write them as developmental objectives. Write them as action-oriented descriptions. What are the differences that you want to see? And how are you going to make those differences? What will you do differently? And the second point I love on there too, as you're starting to think about these, write them in a way that if you handed them off to somebody else, they'd understand what you are intending to do, what your actions would be. Be just as clear as you can, because that moves you a step toward achievement by being able to have it in mind in terms of what the changes are. Capture the specifics, and here are some of the specifics to help you in that regard. You might think about what will you gain if you make the change, what will you lose? And you might create a go, no-go out of that, maybe even a 2x2, a little quick 2x2. When will you begin? Putting time on it, getting it onto a calendar somewhere, getting it onto one of your calendars. When and how often will you try this experiment or try the new behavior? How long are you willing to work on it? And who can help you? That's a really important one. And maybe they're not helping you through the accomplishment itself, but they're drivers for you, they're helpers for you just in reinforcing your confidence or helping to energize you. I know certainly I have friends, it's not that they're taking the track along with me, that they're helping me have the lift needed to achieve whatever it is I'm discussing with them, but their enthusiasm, just because we're good friends, their enthusiasm can be energizing, more than motivational, really energizing, and I hope the same is true for you. When and where are you going to encounter roadblocks? These can be people too. The blockers can be they can be circumstances, they can be policies and procedures, they can be individuals. And when you encounter these roadblocks, how are you going to overcome that? And then finally, on the last item there, and it's a really important one, what will success mean? How will you know when you've actually achieved it? How will you know when you've arrived? And then once you've achieved it, how are you going to reinforce the behavior that you have come to, the new behavior? Another way to look at this is to think about the actions you will take relative to the resource needs that you would have. And resources, it could be financial resources, but likely it will also include time, energy, and stamina. And so one way to think about that is the actions, the priority of the action. So is it something, and I would suggest that you use this, you may not have things in all 9 quadrants, but to use this to think about plotting out how it's kind of a look at the bang for the buck, how much are you getting out of what you're doing. So prioritizing first how important the action is to you. So on the left side scale there, would it be something that's not all that important? Would it be something of medium importance? Would it be of high importance? And then at the same time, looking at how easy or difficult is it to achieve in regard to your resource needs. And certainly the starting place, if you have some things that are in that upper left quadrant that are of high importance and easy to achieve, that's a great starting place, right? Because you're going to get reinforcement, you're going to accomplish it, you're not going to have to expend too much energy or time or stamina, and it's something that by definition you consider to be highly important. If you can't hit it there, if you want to stay up as much as you can, stay up to the upper left side. So in those other boxes that surround that one are also really good places to start if nothing hit that top left box for you. And the other perspective here is looking at a worksheet that again evolved for me or emerged from me from reading a couple of books and articles by Stuart Friedman. And this is saying, okay, we have various domains that we tend to in our lives. And he cuts it into work, a career, home, family, community, society, and self. And as you think about change and pulling your personal leadership development together, not just for the paper for this course, but much more importantly on an ongoing basis, what's the what, the why are you doing it? What's the value purpose of what the change you want to make, the development that you want to put into action? What is it you're aiming for in terms of a goal? What sorts of milestones and measurements will you have along the way? What sorts of actions and changes are you considering? How will you make the change? What will lead to actually achieving the change? How will you get there? What are the steps? And then finally, the who piece of this is in regard to drivers for you, people who can help you actually achieve it, people who you can engage to help you get there. It's an ongoing process. And it's one that it becomes enormously worthwhile, not just for you as an individual global leader, but certainly also for the people you touch, and even when you think about ripple effects, for people who are touched by the people you touch. So people you won't even ever know or ever recognize that you have affected will nonetheless be affected by your behaviors. And in making these changes for improvements that you want to make, the influence you have is enhanced certainly along the way. So I wish you I hope you are energized to think about these things and put the time in to really do some planning for it and sort of stay the course in terms of moving forward. I was reading a quote, and I think it was attributed to Confucius. I'm going to muck it up a bit, but the essence of it was, it doesn't matter how fast you go, what matters is that you keep going. So again, the idea that you keep moving forward, and I wish you well in that. If you have questions that evolve like anything else, if you have questions along the way as you're doing this, by all means, please get in touch with me, and I'll do my best to motivate you or to coach you along. Thanks.